Hey guys, what's up? How's my audio by the way?
It sounds good.
Hey guys, what's up? Today I have someone really special and it's a birthday special interview. Will has been my friend for over 4 years now, and it's so crazy to see how fast time flies. And we have both been on this journey to just improve ourselves, to find a better version of ourselves. And it's hard enough to do this work alone, but when you do it with someone who has the same passion, the same interest, the same commitment, uh, it makes the journey much less lonely. And on the contrary, it makes it super fun. And today I wanted to just have a chat with my very close friend Will, and just like talk about like our journey, what we have learned, not so much as to like what worked, but as to like w- how our lives have changed over a long period of time, and then the past 4 years, and then where are we going now, who are we now, and stuff like that. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Prem. It's great to be here. And yeah, thanks for having me be your birthday guest.
But birthday guest, I stopped uploading in this channel. I was like I give up, no more YouTube videos. And I was showing my friend like my YouTube clips, and she was like, "You gotta like do YouTube interviews again." So then I thought, damn, I should. I thought, you know what?
Well,
I know.
you've had some great guests on this podcast. Like you had Doug Knoll on, who obviously I recommended to you and you interviewed him.
Yeah.
That interview is solid gold. Like I've watched that however many times and I pick up something new each time. So
Yeah.
yeah, keep uploading because I love it.
Thank you so much, man. But let's talk about this. I was thinking this morning, you know, in my deep sleep, I was thinking, why is it? And we have talked about this in a lot of depth as to like our beliefs, our thoughts, our feelings, our whatever perception, perspective, they all seem to like color the way we view reality. They seem to almost alter in a not just in like a small way, in like a huge way, impact the way you just perceive the world and also the things that happen to you. And I was thinking why that is such such a case, because you wouldn't assume reality to be, you'd assume reality to be constant like they show in physics, and then you are having like an experience that's happening from reality. But it seems
Right.
to be something really opposite, where you are having a perspective of reality and it's just showing you the movie that you want to see or that you're expecting to see.
Right. So my take on that as kind of a broad principle thing is I've heard somebody say once, and this is a little bit, I don't want to say facetious necessarily, but it's a little bit tongue in cheek. But I heard him once say, you have never experienced anything outside yourself, right? Because if you think about just the way that the human body works, you have information coming in from outside. That then gets processed by your retina, your brain, and it's then converted into information and it then becomes what you see. So he made the point that if everything you've ever experienced basically has to come into you. You then have to interpret it, and then your brain works out what it sees. Technically speaking, everything you have ever experienced is subjective. It only takes place inside your own head. So, like I said, that's a little bit tongue in cheek because you could probably start to pull that apart in different ways. But as a sort of starting off principle, I think that
Mm-hmm.
our sort of mutual mentor, Glenn, always says that life doesn't come to you, it comes from you. Again, a bit of a black and white statement, but basically, if you unpack it, the way that you see the world, like the reality that you see, is not going to be the reality I see, is not going to be the reality that somebody else sees, because everything that happens to us, we have to filter it or interpret it in some way. People are meaning making machines, right?
Yeah, true.
So, um, so the reason is that reality isn't a constant. It's like, well, who's to say what reality is? Like it's all an interpretation. And the best example is, I heard somebody say once, he's like, so he's married with kids. He's a good friend of mine. He basically said, let's say you and I were trapped on a cruise ship, right? And it was a cruise ship where we were the only men. I'm completely forgetting exactly what the analogy was,
Yeah.
but let's say we were the only men, and we were trapped on board this cruise ship that was stranded at sea with 300 women. If you're single, that's a brilliant chain of events. If you're married, it's a little bit of a problem. I've kind of butchered the metaphor that he used, but you
Yeah.
kind of get the idea. The same situation, the same reality, but you will have two different interpretations, which is this is great or this is bad. To flip it another way, let's say you're stranded on that cruise ship. You really, really don't want to get back to the mainland to get back to work because you hate your job. You've got somebody else who's getting back to the mainland because they're going to close like a multi-million-dollar deal that's going to set them up for life. Same situation, which is you are stranded at sea. One of you is going to think, oh, thank God I can stay here as long as I can. The other one is going to think, you know what? I really want to get back to the
Yeah.
main. So situation, so reality might be constant, but you are always going to frame it. You are always going to interpret and look at it a set way, which therefore is going to determine how you feel about it, which then determines how you will act towards reality. It will determine how other people act towards
Exactly.
you. The whole thing I think is there is objective reality, but I don't think anybody can really necessarily say what it is because the way that you perceive it colors so much of what your experience is. That's probably the best way I can put it.
I was It's so interesting because I was just like looking into my thoughts, and I was just like watching my thoughts, right? And I was noticing like these thoughts arising, and then immediately my mind went, oh, this is me, this is my thought, and I must like do something about this, you
Right,
know? And I feel it's not just the perspective or the perception or beliefs or whatever. It's also like how your identity is linked to that perspective, and
right.
which then determines how you react to like a certain situation that's coming to you, which then determines like a new weird chain of events that's just super unique to you, and you know.
Right. I mean, identity is one of these tricky things. This is not I'm not an expert on this, but basically,
Yeah.
identity, you have kind of a hierarchy of criteria in the way that you interpret the world. And identity is one of the, I think I've actually flipped that around. Like identity is
Yeah.
one of the fundamental things because what your identity is or how you perceive yourself is therefore going to color the way you think, the way you feel, the way you behave. Like identity is kind of a fundamental building stone, which is why you have to be really, really careful. We've talked about this a lot whenever we use I am statements like I
Yeah.
am this or I am that, because what that does is that takes something that is a process in NLP, neuro linguistic programming. That's called a nominalization. You basically take something that is a process, and life is a process, like it's constantly changing. If you then concretize it, so you make it static, like an I am statement, I am is unchangeable and immovable. So you have to be really careful with the I am statements that you use because you then sort of lock yourself in. And this is why identity, I think, is so hard to change for a lot of people. It's because fundamentally identity takes the form of an I am, which then just makes it more rigid. But it is a fundamental thing because if your identity shifts, everything else tends to shift along with it. Like identity is kind of one of the big equalizers, I guess.
Yeah.
But then again, identity is actually really hard to define, which is why it's so difficult to change.
But like over the years, there is something that we have changed, I would say, as a person, as the way we experience the world, the way we interpret things, they have all
Mhm.
changed. So I guess like what motivated you to like even start this journey?
Well, that's a good question. I knew you were going to hit me with that at some point. um, I mean, there's probably kind of a sort of big frame picture answer and then a short frame picture answer. Probably the big one is um, I think probably as a fundamental worldview or just the way that I'm wired, I don't really see things as static. Like I've never been able to sort of connect with this idea. It's like, oh, this is just the way something is, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like I've never been able to resonate with that kind of worldview or see things that way. So at some kind of a deep level of my wiring, things can always be better, or things can always be changed, or things can always be improved. I just, like I said, I can't, I really struggle to then connect with people who will see things as a bit more rigid. And I think that's probably at like the deepest level of the nervous system or whatever it is, or how people are wired. I can't really explain that one. Probably the smaller frame thing is what motivated the journey. It just kind of happened at some point, but I think probably the impetus for it at some point was just that I was just not satisfied with the way things were. And so the two of those ideas sort of go hand in hand, right? But I think
Yeah.
when things really started on a journey, was like, I want to be different than the way I am. It wasn't some big existential crisis. It was just like, I'm not doing the things that I want to be doing, or I'm not seeing parts of my life in the way I want to see them. And so let me look into how I can change it. It really, what that is, I think it's, some people have kind of a fundamental drive towards change or improvement or something else. So I think all these points are fairly consistent. Really, it was just a desire for things to be better than they were.
When you frame it this way, I feel I had a similar experience. But when I talk to other people, the two things that you said, that you believe that you can fundamentally change the world, and
Mhm.
you're like not satisfied with how things are.
Right.
And these two hand in hand. And for me, it's almost like you can always learn to then fix the unsatisfactory situation,
Right.
whatever it might be.
Which is actually a really important point, because dissatisfaction is a little bit of a loaded term. We've talked about this a lot. There's this idea about being dissatisfied doesn't actually necessarily mean unhappy, and it doesn't have to be this really kind of negative term. Dissatisfaction just means that there's a tension between where you are and where you want to be.
Want to
So
be.
it can actually be a very positive thing. It's a little bit of a loaded term, but I can't think of a better one.
I know, but it's so interesting because this entire like framework, it puts the locus of control within you,
Mhm.
if you notice. But let's just say I don't believe I can change the world and the world is like happening to me, but I'm still unsatisfied. It's almost the same, except the locus of control seems to be outside.
Right.
So someone has to come and change it for you, or
Right.
until then it won't change, right?
Right, and I think that's where, because you mentioned at the beginning this really important point about trying to do any kind of journey on your own is always going to be more difficult than it is with other people. And this is where things like training, mentorship, coaching, whatever it is, comes into place, because there's very few problems you can face that someone somewhere hasn't worked out how to fix, right? Like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. But there is kind of a fundamental point, is you have to believe that change is possible. There are some people who, I think there are some people that just think, this is the way it is, or I am the way I am, and there's nothing that can be done about that. If you've got that as a fundamental worldview, they are naturally going to filter out, because we get loads of information thrown at us. Like, right, we delete, distort, and generalize everything that comes to us. If you don't have the belief that change is possible, which is a whole separate thing, there could be, a billion reasons for that one. You are not going to take the step to actually try to change, because you think, well, what's the point? This is sort of polarity responders. So who are people who will shut things down as soon as they hear them. If it doesn't quite gel within their worldview, they will dismiss it straight away. I'm lucky and you're lucky, I suppose, in the sense that part of these things can change. Like, you can open your mind and you can open your worldview, but at kind of a fundamental level, the idea that change is possible is a very deep part of who I am. So therefore, I am willing to look at and try and experiment with
Um,
things, um, because that's just the way that I see the world. And I can't say how much of that has been kind of, this whole thing about
yeah.
nature or nurture. I heard somebody say once brilliantly, they were like, do you think it's nature or nurture? And he says, well, neither, it's choice. Um, which, again, if you put these down to like tautologies or kind of black and white things, you're never going to get very far. But there's probably an element of both. I think I've nurtured it, and there's an element of nature in it, that I am kind of the way I am. There are some people within my family who are great, but I wouldn't say necessarily they don't think change is possible, but the whole kind of area that we spend a lot of time in probably just isn't that interesting to them, right? So there's an element of nature, there's an element of nurture, and there's a big element of choice. Like I am choosing to try and improve the things that aren't as good as I want them to be.
Yeah.
And again, that's not a negative or like a dissatisfaction. That's just I want something to be better than it is.
It's so interesting because now that I'm thinking and processing like unsatisfaction, I wouldn't say that's like the right word for me personally. I would say for me it's more like the disgust, like a fucking like a repulsion, almost
Right.
to who I am or what is happening to me. Like I do not like what's happening to me, like in like a fundamental level, right? And then of course I do some work, I change, I become a better person. But what's interesting is like as I meet people, I would meet a version of myself. I would see a version of my past self in someone else doing like the same thing what I was doing. And the reaction I have to them, I try to be compassionate, right? But my initial reaction is like disgust. It's like,
Yeah, you have a really strong reaction to things that you've seen and you've overcome. So if you've had something that you've been wrestling with and you see somebody else wrestling with, you do have a huge amount of compassion and patience for them. But there's something, I think, because you have worked so hard to get away from the way things have been before, or the way that things have happened to you. That's been such a massive driver for you that actually
yeah,
looking back can be very. I can't stand the word triggering. I really can't stand it, but that
yeah,
can be a
yeah,
very difficult thing to look at. So you have
yeah,
kind of a strong reaction to it. But and this, you and I obviously talk a lot. We spoke for ages yesterday. This is
yeah,
the kind of thing that I always say you have to give yourself more credit for, because you are, and I said this to you, like there's a couple of areas that you've been working on where, in terms of your energy and your vibe, the emotions you're feeling, the thoughts you're thinking, you are unrecognizable from how you were a few weeks ago. And if we broaden that out to like the years that you and I have been friends, I really genuinely don't recognize you from what you were like when I first met you. You're a
I
completely
know.
different. The thing is, you even look different, and I don't mean like you're 4 years older. I mean you because um
I'm
it,
losing my hair, man. That's
yeah,
the difference. And I'm joking.
imagine. But no, it's one of these sort of fundamental things. Is actually you've got a lot better on it. So one of the things that's developed in you that I've seen over the years, as you've made these massive strides, the last year especially, actually your compassion levels have gone up through the roof. So it's interesting that you sort of made that point, because it's a pattern that I've seen in you and we've spoken about over the years. What's fascinating to me is the extent to which that has kind of flatlined over the last, like, yeah, 8 to 12 months, especially.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? But I wish I feel I can always do more. And whenever I look at you, I feel you're so committed to like the actual techniques and the actual work, which is what I respect you so much for. I've never seen some guy just take some techniques which might feel like a little bit woo woo to me. I'm like, I'm just gonna like give it a shot when the things are really bad to just get it back to like the baseline. That's how I go at you, like go all in.
Yeah, I have somebody said to me recently, I have no middle ground. I'm either like binary code. It's either zero or runs or one. So if I'm going for it, I don't have, there's no chill when it comes to me with in some things I'm very, very like mellow and laid back. If it's something that I'm like, okay, this is a problem and I need to work on it, then I hit it until it's gone. It's like kind of, I don't do half measures when it comes to particularly anything around the area of self-improvement, or like, this is a pattern I have, this is the way I react, this area doesn't look the way I want it to do. I don't have half measures. I go until I hit it. So I really appreciate the compliment. What's really interesting, I think we spoke about this yesterday, was when you said, these things that might sound a little bit woo, and as I look back over the last, like, however many years it is, one of the recurring things about the things that have made the biggest difference to my life are the things that I have initially dismissed as being complete bullshit or being ridiculous or just like, what the hell is this? So the best example, because I know we were talking about this yesterday, but we sort of ran out of time, so I didn't do it. When it comes to energy, and and people talk about energy for me is actually not that woo woo when you look at it. Like everything in the universe is made up of energy, right? Like everything
Yeah.
is energy, emotion. It's energy, frequency, and vibration, which makes up everything. And there are different energies, there are different frequencies which exist in the world around us and exist within us. And so you therefore get into that there are frequencies, or like there are energies that you can tune into that are much more likely to lift you up, make you happier, more productive,
Yeah.
kind, more compassionate, whatever it is. There are also, frequencies that are much kind of lower or much darker, that exist in the world around us and exist in ourselves and exist in other people. And that's such a fundamental part of the way that I see the world now. So I think people talk about, oh, this person has a good vibe, or I got weird vibes from this one, or, this person has a good
Yeah.
energy, or whatever else it is. But to me, that's a fundamental part of how the world is made up. It's so integral to how I see the world now, because I see, how do I put it? It's like I see energy moving, and I see sort of what the definitions are, how they work. And to me, it's so clearly the way that things are. It's such a consistent way of seeing and understanding what's going on that I can't see it any other way. But what's fascinating to me is the first time I really heard somebody talk about energy, and he was I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody who was talking about like some partner that he'd met, and
Mm-hmm.
we were just kind of an energetic match, is the way he described it. And for some reason, there was something about it I really disliked. And I don't remember if I said it out loud or I thought it in my head, but I remember very distinctly um, being like, why people keep talking about this energy bullshit? Grow up,
Yeah.
just
Give me
live
something
life the way it's
practical.
supposed to be lived. So I dismissed it. What's really interesting to me is within I was already sort of on this process. I was very interested in self-development and kind of growing, but I remember hearing this thing about energy, and I'm just like, oh, fuck off, just
Yeah.
it's ridiculous because it sounded woo-woo and bullshit. But I remember very, very clearly a few weeks later on, I was like listening to some podcast, or I was watching some video or something, and somebody, the person hosting it, mentioned this book, Power versus Force, and kept
By
talking about it,
David
kept talking about,
Hawkins.
by David Hawkins, and kept mentioning it's like, oh, this thing will like completely shift your worldview, like it'll change the way that you see life, which is something that's always going to pique my interest. Like that's the way of if you want to frame anything to get my interest, that's the kind of way to frame the language of it. And I was going on holiday to France with my dad to go and visit my aunt and uncle. Um, and they live out in the middle of nowhere in the countryside. It's gorgeous, but basically there is nothing to do. So I was sort of compiling a whole load of Kindle books that I could read on the way there, because I knew I'd have like a week or two of just kind of lounging around in the French countryside,
Yeah.
not doing anything else. And this book, Power versus Force, was on sale, so it was ridiculously cheap. Like it was next to
Yeah.
nothing. And I was like, okay, well, it's been recommended. I'll read it. And I remember that summer going through and reading that book, which is basically all about energy and vibration, like human energy, the energy around you, and basically trying to put really kind of solid, quote unquote, scientific, but basically like trying to explain scientifically as much as it can what exactly is happening when people talk about, there's a vibe here, this place has a vibe, this person has a vibe, or this has a good energy, this doesn't have a good energy. What exactly is happening, to sort of explain the mechanism behind it? And I remember reading that book, and I'm usually quite critical when it comes to language. I
Yeah.
can pass things apart fairly well. But I remember reading it, and every single page of it, I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. If this is true, then that would explain why that situation unfolded the way it did, or it would explain why I reacted in this particular situation, or with this person I feel this way, or whatever. Like it really was just kind of a new worldview. And by not even the end, not even close to the end of it, I was like, this energy thing actually makes a lot more sense. And obviously we can get on to talk about the journey, but again, it's one of those really interesting things is the things that I have dismissed like the most reflexively when I've heard about them tend to be the things that have made the biggest difference, like developing an understanding of energy and an awareness of it and how to use it to kind of, deal with your own issues and actually transform yourself more into the person you want to be by understanding what the energy is you're looking for. That's been something that has really completely changed the way that I am. Glenn said it to me a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, it must have been a couple of weeks ago. We were talking. He was like, when I started working with him, I was just this like tight ball of like tension and frustration and anger or whatever it was. I don't actually remember myself being that bad, but
Yeah.
regardless, um, and and then slowly started to use these energy tools and these understandings that Glenn gave me in particular to sort of unpack this and then rewire the things that were going on and then start to eventually shift towards the way I am, such that the way I was a few years ago, I simply don't see or experience the world the same way anymore. That's change at like the most fun. That's an identity level change.
Change.
Not that I ever attacked it on the level of identity, but um, that's kind of a fundamental change. Like the biggest change there has ever been in my life and in my worldview, like something that is now, I can't separate myself from energy work as kind of a spiritual practice, if you will. But what's interesting to me is that it's one of those things that the more heavily I seem to dismiss it at first, the bigger an impact it tends to make on my life.
I think another point that you mentioned, so interesting, is how, like, when you are looking back at your whatever moments or something, and it never made sense in the past, but now in this new framework it starts making sense. I feel like that experience is something really valuable, because I always used to like study I always used to study self development stuff just out of desperation. It wasn't like I was passionate about the subject. It's
Mm.
just more like I just want to escape this, so I'm just reading this. And I remember some things started to make sense as I got older. And the reason being, I had more experiences now that I can like process this new framework with and actually see, oh, this is why this happened this way, and this is why that happened that way.
Right.
And you know what I mean? And I
Yeah.
feel, yeah, go.
So I think that's you said something my brain's trying to articulate. Okay, I suppose the best example that I can give is, because sometimes you take these things and you kind of put a label to them, and it's kind of it becomes a little bit more abstract and difficult to follow. So the best example that I can give that I think illustrates what I've just said and you've just said is, when you look at energy, and let's say what we've been taught is referred to as low vibration energy. So these are basically just like, the darker energies. So fear, anger,
Yeah,
frustration, stress,
frustration.
anxiety, disappointment, restrictions, stuckness, lack. Like we can go through all the definitions. These energies have. So I'm going to try and take this from the realm of like the woo woo and the abstract and try and put it actually into something a bit more concrete. So these energies have definitions, and one of the definitions that our like mutual mentor Glenn Ackerman taught is, one of the characteristics of these low vibration energies is they have what is called an ounce of pleasure and a pound of
Kind of
pain.
thing.
And so probably the best and so when I sort of had that explained through a power versus force and then working with Glenn, there was one of these things when I'm like, oh, this would explain why that situation. So ounce of pleasure, pound of pain would be, for example, you're feeling a low vibration energy emotion. Um, and so let's say anger, like you're really, really angry, right? And so in order to kind of relieve that tension and give you that little bit like that ounce of pleasure, you will then go and slam a door, right? Like you slam the door, you release the tension, it feels really good. What happens? You break the door, you break the door frame. Let's say you live somewhere where you rent. You've now got to tell like the whoever's responsible for maintenance that you've broken the door. They've got to get somebody out. Your door doesn't work properly, you're in trouble for that. You've then got to pay more for it. All of these consequences sort of follow from that one brief moment of pleasure. You've then got a sort of realm of consequences. Or let's say you're feeling
Yeah,
frustrated,
yeah.
so you're like, I'm going to treat myself to some retail therapy that you can't afford. You get that little bit of a pleasure hit from buying something, but you then don't have enough money to pay for food or to pay for fuel for your car or whatever it is, which causes you bigger problems down the line. It's one of these consistent characteristics of a low vibration energy, that you have that little bit of a pleasure hit, because the pleasure hit disguises the fact that the consequences that follow it can be huge. Best example, you look at anybody, like any public figure, any politician whose life has been ruined by one stupid sexual encounter. They've
Yeah.
had a little bit, they've had their 15 minutes of pleasure. They then end up losing their career. They lose their families. They go through a bit of divorce. They lose their kids, whatever it is. Again, this is without judgment. It's
Yeah.
illustrating everybody's human
Point.
being, and everybody sort of does what they think is right in the moment. But it's really interesting when you understand that characteristic. It's like you've got that little bit of pleasure, and then if you look at them, the rest of their lives can look drastically different, because of that little like ounce of pleasure and then the pound of pain that follows it. Usually it, or generally speaking, it follows when they've done something they shouldn't be doing, which is a low vibration energy. That was more of a diatribe than I meant to go on, but it kind of, I think it illustrates the point. Is you take that from the woo-woo and the abstract down to concrete terms. When you have low vibration energy characteristics,
Disappointment, frustration.
explained to you, it then sort of, I was able to look back and then say, okay, so that time that I was really pissed off, so I then did this thing, and it caused me no end of headaches, even though it seemed like a really good, like, fun idea at the time. It caused me a whole load of misery afterwards. That's because I was operating in an energy frequency that was a lower vibration. And one of the characteristics is there is always going to be a sting in the tail. It looks appealing, and you pay the consequence afterwards. That's just sort of one, I think, tiny definition. But you see where I'm going with it.
I feel ultimately is the like a relationship that you have with like different kinds of pleasure is what then dictates like who you are. I even feel like the 7 deadly sins are like 7 different flavors of pleasures, and a person just indulged in these pleasures, kind of like drowning in these pleasures, because every pleasure has like a different quality to it, right? For example, gluttony has like a different quality to it, like the high. I was like watching this video of like this guy who was like this really thin, handsome violinist, right? It's Nick Avocado or something like that, right? A mukbang, whatever. It's just like some guy, American dude. He was thin. He was playing amazing violin. Good looking dude. He started a YouTube channel, and then he started doing mukbangs. Mukbang is basically you just take lots of food and just eat it. And he noticed it got a lot of views, right? And he just did that, and you can watch this person slowly like diving into insanity. But every time he eats, you can like see the pleasure in his eyes, like, oh, you know what I mean? And I was like, oh my god, this is like crazy. But the pleasure you get for, let's say, sloth, like laziness, is kind of slightly different. Same with pride is different. Envy is kind of like different,
Right. Which is really, I've actually never thought about that. Like this concept of the 7 deadly sins, like Dante's Inferno. Yeah, I've really actually have never thought about that. But you're right. Every single one of those, it's like, if you think about it, when you call it, I mean, again, depending on like your religious, spiritual framework, whatever. But basically, as a principle, you've got these 7 deadly sins, and when they say deadly sins, it's like these are the things that will destroy you. Every single one of those actually hooks you in through pleasure, right? Like gluttony is pleasurable because stuffing your face with food is pleasurable. But if you keep doing it, you are going to end up with serious health problems. Pride feels good. Like we all know people who strut around with big egos, and a phrase like pride comes before the fall. It feels really, really good. But the more you sort of build up your pride, like the higher you go, the harder you're going to fall. Lust, for example, lust is a pleasurable.
Most pleasurable.
It's not quite it's not an emotion, but like lust is a pleasurable thing. But if you keep lusting, this is where people then end up like obsessive or addictive or whatever else. And that causes all kind of problems. If you look at porn addiction, for example, I mean, fundamentally, that's probably the best modern day example of lust. people that then end up with porn addictions, for example, that messes with their neurology that to such an extent that it causes all kind of mental health, emotional health, social problems. Like this, was reading this thing once that porn, for example, because a lot of men, like younger men than us, I think, particularly like the next generation that's coming up, really struggle with it. And one of the things that I was reading is sort of neurologically what it does is it rewires the dopamine, so the pleasure circuits in your brain, such that something that is supposed to give you a reward, which is basically some kind of partnership with somebody that you find desirable, you get the reward because dopamine is triggered by. It's not actually triggered by getting something; it's triggered by basically the anticipation or the pursuit of it. So, in other words, in order to this must be an evolutionary thing. Like in order to maximize the survival of the human race, the dopamine pleasure instinct is kicked in by the pursuit of a partner or partners, whatever it's doing. So it's basically like it's playing the game is pleasurable so that you continue to play it. People that short circuit that with a porn addiction, what they do is they rewire the circuit such that they get the reward without the effort that goes into it. And that rewiring fundamentally means that because the dopamine gets triggered without any effort, the effort then becomes anxiety inducing. And this is where a lot of people with porn addictions develop really big, like social anxiety problems. They end up not actually being able to go out and meet potential partners or play the game because by taking that dopamine process and short circuiting it so that they get the instant hit without any of the work, therefore, by definition, doing any kind of effort becomes anxiety inducing. So again, if you look at it from the seven deadly sins, so let's use that as lust as an example, it might feel great, but the reason that it's in sort of Dante's language, like it's a deadly sin, is the consequences of that, or what we would call one of the definitions, the characteristics of low vibration energy. You get the little bit of pleasure, but the pain that can then be generated is can be permanently damaging. Like it can cause real problems. I think we just covered like 3 of the 7 deadly sins, but even sloth, for example, not doing anything actually feels really good. So this morning I got up early and I went to the gym, right? I would much have preferred to just lie on the sofa, with the TV on in the background, like listening to some music or whatever. And that actually would have been a lot more pleasurable. And that's fine, like, 1 day, 2 days, whatever. If that is a consistent habit, and so therefore my health gets shot to shit, that therefore is another example of this low vibration energy or a kind of deadly sin. If I spent 30 years not doing any exercise, I'm not going to be in a good place at the end of it or along the journey, right? So it's really interesting. I'd never thought about that before, but I think it illustrates the point really well. Is these things feel good, but you then have to look at, so again, a little bit of lust or desire is not a bad thing. A little bit of gluttony and like really enjoying your food is not a bad thing. A little bit of sloth and resting when you're tired is not a bad thing. A little bit of pride, like sometimes having a little bit of an ego is not a bad thing. But again, if you then allow these things to run rampant, that's where you then have problems.
It's so interesting because I remember like this is even the dopamine and like the fear response that a person has is just wired differently within us. For example, when you imagine something, right? Let's say you imagine a pleasurable experience, your dopamine centers don't activate. But if you imagine something like scary or anxious or whatever, right? Your fear response, the autonomous nervous system, that activates.
Yeah.
Just with your imagination.
Yeah, well, the brain can't tell the difference between an event that's real and an event that's imagined. This is why, like,
only when you're scared of it.
Yeah, well, because it triggers the same physiological thing. Because basically, if your brain doesn't make a distinction between what's real and what's vividly imagined, then it's going to trigger your nervous system and it's going to trigger your response. This is why, professional athletes, almost all of them, to my knowledge, are trained, like the really elite athletes are trained in some form of mental rehearsal, because if they visualize and imagine their training vividly enough, that produces actual concrete results, when they're out there. Like there's more
Yeah.
studies that I think than you can count out there about people who've even not necessarily athletes, but things like piano players. If they spend time really, really deeply imagining that they're playing a piece correctly, they've done like studies on this where they have one group who learn a piece and they don't do any mental rehearsal, and another group who, outside of their actual practice time, they imagine they're playing the piano and going through it. The group that did the mental rehearsal learned to play the piece a lot faster or a lot more accurately. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was Michael Phelps, but like one of the swimmers could do such a detailed mental rehearsal that he could time his imaginary swim to within like a couple of hundredths of a second to what his actual swims were like.
Damn, that's crazy. Probably like imagining every stroke.
Yeah, that's what they
But
do. Is imagine it really vividly. So it's basically even when they're not in the pool, as far as their brain and their body and their nervous system is concerned, they are in the pool.
I'm talking like big game here, like
Mm.
it's almost, and that's okay. You can go almost stoic on it, which is like fuck pleasure, fuck it, fuck, don't indulge in it, just be stoic, whatever. But I'm not like immune to it, and I feel the reason pleasure is so indicious in nature is like so kind of like hard to escape is because when the pleasure hits, it's like the prefrontal cortex, the you part of your mind, just
Mm.
shuts down, and more like the amygdala is active,
Yeah,
and it's hard to process and act human when the only part of you that's active is the animal side of you. You know what I mean?
right.
And
Yeah. So yeah,
yeah,
go
go
on.
on. And I feel like that's what I feel everyone's struggling with is just that to create that is just to be awake enough where even when you're going through all these things, you're not reacting, but just like able to process information to like some extent where you are able to like,
Right.
do the kind of right thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. However, I'm going to throw that back at you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to be contrarian because I like to do this. Yes, if you're kind of wrestling with something that's like an addiction or you know something that basically you're in such a pleasure pursuit that you're right, your thinking rational mind closes down. But at the same time, a little bit of pleasure is basically just like enjoyment in the things that you do. So what would the issue be?
I think the issue would be when the stuff that you're indulging in is at the price of what you want to do in life or what you want to be in life or who you are, or you know what I
Right.
mean?
So basically, in other words, you're doing things that feel good at the expense of things that are actually beneficial. Is that what?
Yeah. And it's
Right.
already harmful to you in the long run. You're probably
Yeah.
trading your self-esteem or whatever, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think every single I would be very surprised if there's a single human being on the planet, unless they're like an enlightened monk in the Himalayas,
Monk.
who doesn't wrestle with that exact thing.
That's why he's in
Um,
Himalayas, dude. That is exactly why he's in Himalayas, because he knows if he's with us, he probably couldn't be that.
that may well be why people who have made that kind of life choice, they isolate themselves in the
Yeah.
middle of nowhere because you're right, because there's nothing to there's no distractions. And it reminds me of that kind of quote from a bodybuilder, and I can't for the life of me remember what his name is. Hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. Um,
I
because
remember.
because generally speaking, the easy things that we want to do are the easy and the pleasurable things, but those eventually are going to come back to bite you. So again, is the example I used a few minutes ago. The easy and pleasurable thing would have not been to get up and have to go maneuver through traffic to go to the gym this morning. And again, I'm not an expert on this. This is it's something that I've been much less consistent with recently than I would like to have been. But basically, I gave myself a kick up the backside, and I was like, no,
Yeah.
I need to go to the gym today. And I actually got a much bigger reward out of it than I would have by staying home. So even though the easier and probably more immediately pleasurable thing would have been to stay home, the actual reward that I get and sort of the longer term rewards that I would get from getting into my car and going to the gym are a much bigger payoff. So I think it's the tension that every human being struggles with. What feels good now and what feels less good? Like, what sacrifice do I make now in order to kind of in order to improve my future? Because if you just do what feels good now, I can't think of a situation. There's very few situations in which long term that's an effective strategy to do anything. Like, what feels good now would be to spend all your money on things that you want, but that's a very, very poor strategy for the medium term and the long term. Is it poor strategy even for tomorrow? It would feel much better today to just eat nothing but junk food. And again, today is fine, tomorrow is fine. Long term, you're not going to live very long, or nowhere near as long as you would have lived. So I think it's the tension that everybody's wrestling with.
And I feel like the balance is somewhere in the between, and I think that's the hard part, right? You can't swing this way or you can't swing that way. You have to kind of like balance yourself somewhere in the between.
Right. So I was going to say yes, but it's like yes, and the good thing that you and I have, especially like the journey that we've been on over the last few years, is actually getting the tools together to actually be able to sort of make that shift. So, for example, we've got EPR tools, so energy processing and releasing, or emotional processing and releasing. This is something that Glenn taught both of us, and it's all these ways to take. Usually, I mean, generally speaking, the way it's taught is to take something within you that feels bad, and then we've got all these like over a dozen ways of actually processing it and releasing it and getting it out, so that, you know, whatever we're feeling stressed or angry or anxious about, we can release it. But sort of the second tool of it is that you can also use it to expand things that make you feel good, or something that feels good, but you know is not necessarily good for you. You can kind of release the desire for it as well. So we have the tools that if I've got something that I'm and this comes down to whether or not you know you can do something and whether or not you actually do it. So, for example, I have the tools. I don't want to, you know, eat, exercise, or stick to kind of a healthier diet or whatever it is. So therefore, my temptation is stay at home and eat junk food, right? I have the tools to make those less desirable, to basically process and release that desire out, so that I can then replace it with a desire to exercise, to eat healthy, or whatever it is. Whether or not I do that as consistently as I should is a whole separate question. But the actual principle, the idea behind it, is one of the big rewards of the journey that you and I have been on, and we continue to be on, is we've actually got the tools to take control, to take proactive control over that process that for a lot of people is just automatic. It's one of the things in life where, you know, they're like, sometimes I do what I want to do, sometimes I don't, and then life just kind of flip-flops all the time like that. We are very lucky is that we've had the mentoring, we've had the coaching, and we've had the training and the support and the experience to say, actually, this thing does not need to be the way it is. I have things that I can do to change it. And that goes back to what we're saying right at the beginning about fundamental worldview, is like, I know that I can do something about this. Whether or not I choose to, again, it is part of the tension. Like, we're only human, and, you know, I fail just as much as I succeed, probably more. But the fact is, when that thing sort of clicks in my brain, it's like, no, wait, you know what you have to do here. I'm like, oh wait, yeah, hang on. let me go to my toolbox and then pull out the things. And that's what's allowed me to make, in a lot of areas, so much progress over the years, because I have the tools available to me when I think to use them. And some things I'm really, really consistent in it. I use them every day, and therefore, like, my life in certain areas has like irrevocably changed for the better. There's other areas where I'm still not as good at it as I'd like to be. But the fact is that there's no, if you heard the tone in my voice, which again is different from what it'd be a few years ago, there's no like, oh, you haven't done what you need to do. Very different for me. I'm like, okay, I haven't done it, all good. It's like the old Chinese, you know, the old Chinese proverb, when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When is the second best time? Now. So it makes the point is, I could say, oh, I could have been doing this thing over the last like however many months, and I could be here and I should be here and blah blah blah. Stop. That's like the Chinese proverb about planting a tree 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So from now on, I can then shift gears and then start to make that change. So it's a very different energy that you approach a problem with, which is, okay, I haven't done it up until now. Fine. There's nothing I can do about that. I don't have a time machine. What I can do is start now. And again,
That's
that's
a
that's a
yeah.
fundamental energy shift, right?
Also, at least for me, in the past, let's say I'm doing this, I also have a time frame in mind, you know. Oh, let's say if I want to go to gym, oh, I want to go to gym and I lose weight in like 6 months, or
Mm.
like, or if I want to like change, oh, I need to like process this information and become like this new guy within like 1 month
Mm.
or something like this. I have like some weird time frame in my mind, and once I start sliding back, my mind is like, oh, you're not going to meet that time frame, and then regress back. And I started learning this instrument called shakuhachi. It's a Japanese flute. It's a hard flute to like just get a sound in. It just takes like 1 month or so to just make a sound. And of course, I go to Google and I search. So how long does it take to learn shakuhachi? Apparently, there's such a famous question that they had like a response already baked in. It's Japanese people, and they said the sooner you start, the longer it takes. Is what they said. So the
Right.
earlier you start, the longer it takes. As in, you'll keep
Oh,
learning.
as in it's a lifetime journey, so it only
It's
stops. It only
yeah.
stops when you
What's
die.
your what exactly? That's what they
Right. Okay.
imply.
Yeah.
And I was like, I feel like so many of the exchanges are not just like a temporary change to like get an outcome that you want, but rather like a change in fundamentally how you're living your life and how you're showing up in the world, so on
Right.
and so forth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and that really comes down to habit formation. It's not where this conversation was going to go, I would think, because I'm not sort of an expert on habits. The reason being is there's two ways that you can approach things. And I'm not saying I'm an expert on this. It could be that some of these are missing pieces that I just don't resonate with. You can address something from the bottom up, or you can address it from the top down. For me, habits tend to be a bit more of a top down thing, whereas I like to tackle things at kind of the very root of them, which is if there's something that people can sort of set a habit and say, well, I'm going to keep talking about exercise like I'm some kind of gym rat, and I'm just not. I don't know why this keeps coming up. But
God
people can set
damn,
this thing
man!
like,
Show your pets.
well, yeah, exactly. It's like it's a really good
Let's
point. But
say
no,
throw
like
you off.
people can sort of set this thing, like these are the routines I'm going to do, and this and that is a really, really good thing to do. And they sort of start with these little habits and they kind of build them up over time. There's another way of doing things, which, like I said, is to come from the bottom up, which is to say there is something at the root of why I don't do this. And I'm basically going to do the deep work to kind of identify what that is, work on it and dissolve it. And then after that, things just become effortless.
I
Um,
know, and I feel like so much of that deep work has to do. And you like really opened my eyes. You kind of like gave me a glimpse of this. I have to give credit to you to like begin this. It is like I said, oh, dude, Will, I have like a self-esteem problem. I think this problem I have is with my self-esteem. And you said, like, Prem, what does that mean? And I'm
mm,
like, I don't know. I know that I have a problem, and people say these kind of problems imply that you have a low self-esteem, so I have low. And even when you like understand the definition of low self-esteem, right? Like lack of confidence or lack of like the ability to
approval.
do approval or the ability to do something or whatever. It's not like you have a. I was listening to this interview. It's a beautiful interview. It's not like you have a problem. It's almost like the example he gave is like imagine you have a dolphin in captivity, and the dolphin in captivity is trained such a way that every time the human comes, that means food. So
Mm,
human comes, you do couple tricks, he gives you food, and you have it. Now imagine you let this dolphin go to like in the ocean, right? And
mm,
now it sees humans in the boat. But this time, humans being bad news. They're going to capture it, they're going to do something to it, right? But this dolphin doesn't know. So it goes to the ship as if, based on
mm.
its past patterns. Like the dolphin doesn't have like a self esteem problem, it just
Right,
has like wrong associations.
right. And this is why. So kind of the really important point that I pick up on that one is this is where it comes down to why you have to be really careful with language and you have to be really careful with definitions because I really like your definition. I think when you and I spoke about this ages ago, whenever it was, I said, I basically said, like, define exactly what that means, because self-esteem, it's a nebulous concept, right? Like, it's really
Yeah.
hard to define. If you can't define something properly, then you can't do anything with it. So the way that it was explained to me years ago was that self-esteem is basically a lack of self-approval. Now, now I'm not saying, now again, this is not counter to the point you're making, but I think we're looking at kind of very different areas when we do it. So self-esteem, or a problem with self-esteem, is a lack of self-approval. Now, the reason that that is a much more useful and helpful definition is it actually gives you something to do to work on it. It's like, well, if I have a lack of self-approval, the way that I get around that is by giving myself some approval, which is a choice. Again, this sort of gets into the realm of techniques, which could take us off on a tangent. But basically, if you decide as best as you can to give yourself some approval right now, and you just make a habit of, you notice whenever you're disapproving of yourself, you make a choice to stop it and give yourself some approval, as much or as little as you can, in whatever way you can. That ultimately, over time, will really kind of, and fairly quickly, start to make a tangible difference to you. If I was to say to you instead, give yourself some esteem, what exactly does that mean, and how can I do anything about it? So this is why I do hammer at you and hammer at myself about the definitions of something, because if you define something badly, then the way that you tackle it is not going to be very effective, because you might be tackling the wrong thing. And this then comes to sort of a deeper level about the reason why some people find change so difficult. It's because very often what people think they're working on is very, very badly defined, or just ill-defined, or what they think they're working on is not under the surface what the actual issue is. So in other words, they're giving it a problem label. And I think self-esteem is actually one of those really good examples of where people be like, I have a self-esteem problem. And you are absolutely right, is they could have just an association problem. They could have, to use the example I just used, they could have a self-approval problem. And if they identify that one, they could then say, well, in that case, I've got, the definition gives me some kind of avenue that I can take it to start to improve it. So in other words, I am going to try and approve of myself as much as I can throughout the day. And it could well be that that solves what they thought was a self-esteem problem, was actually just an issue with the fact that they are constantly judging and disapproving of themselves, as opposed to finding reasons to approve of themselves. It could also be, like you said, that they've got wrong association. So they need to look at the mechanisms in their life and sort of the frameworks and the structures, and I guess kind of the criteria that they have. So if you've got, I'll ask you to define it more, but let's say you've got an associations problem, like you are looking for, you are looking
anxiety or what?
So go on with that
one. Meeting people equal to anxiety. Like, they might hate me, they might dismiss me, they might reject me. There you go. If I meet someone new, and if I just talk to them, they will reject me.
Right. Okay, so yeah, so that's an association. That's really kind of a way that you framed a problem, or it's an association or a judgment. There's lots of different ways that you can get around that. So like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, I actually really like, because it shows you how your mind distorts things. If you look at NLP, sleight of mouth, like verbal reframing, could be a really good one, because if somebody's like, oh, I meet this person and they could reject me. Yes, absolutely they could. But I suppose my answer would be, how do you know? I mean, maybe you don't. Maybe this person would actually really like you. Like, have you ever met somebody before, like a brand new person, who's ended up really, really liking? Yes, like everybody has, right? So if that's happened with one person before, is it possible that it could happen with this person as well? Right. And which would you rather have? Would you rather live in the fear of rejection, or would you rather actually try and possibly meet somebody who could be a great addition to your life? Like, which would you rather have? All of these things. I mean, so that's, again, that's sort of verbal reframing, as opposed to like CBT. But what that's doing is that's actually kind of flipping around your perspective. So basically what it's doing is it's actually scrambling the associations a little bit, because you're right, because the association is new person equals pain equals rejection. If I then did sort of some variation of what I did with you, and I was to flip that around to new person equals possibility equals, I've met people in the past, brand new people who've ended up being
True.
a huge addition to my life. Therefore, this person could as well. You then change the association to new person equals possibility.
Yeah, and also it's like them rejecting you is not personal. That's it. It's like another
Right.
thing.
Well, again, that's the whole thing because rejection is an
Yes.
association. Rejection is a label that you've applied to something. Whereas I don't know. There's loads of ways that you could sort of tackle that and then give it a new meaning. Is just like it's not rejection. That person just showed me who's for me and who's not. Like the whole thing. Like the people who are meant to come along with you will come along with you. So all you've done is you found out very quickly that that's not your person.
Yeah.
Is one way that you could go about reframing it, but the principle is the same. You're changing the associations, and you're right. So therefore, it's not personal because self-esteem and rejection, I think, are taken very personally. But rejection is a value judgment, like it's a label and not
True. True.
necessarily a description of what happens. So let's say somebody rejects you, yes, that is an accurate label, but it's not the only label that you need to apply to it. There's different ways that you could frame it or reframe it to look differently, which is that person could have been, again, not that I like this necessarily because I don't like to sort of label or judge, but you could say this person could have been an absolute nightmare who would have been,
Yeah.
absolutely hellish. So all they've done is they've just saved me a whole load of grief.
Yeah.
I dodged a bullet with that one for example. You could convince yourself of that as an immediate kind of short-term fix that might actually help at least get past what the initial reaction is. All you're doing is you're redefining the association or the meaning. So the event itself is the same, but the interpretation that you have is completely different.
I wanted to like bring up another thing. I was watching this interview of Dr. K, right? And always, at least in the past, like last year or something, I always felt like I want to achieve something, become a great artist,
Mhm.
make great content. Um, I don't know, like something. I want to like do something, right? And that guy said you can never really achieve anything. And the example he gave is like this. Let's say you take a seed and you plant it. You can water it, you can give it sunlight, you can give it the perfect conditions to grow. But you're
Mhm.
not like making the plant grow. The plant is growing by itself. All you're doing
Right.
is just creating an environment which makes the plant grow. But how the plant grows is not up to you. It's like the plant is growing by itself. You know what I mean?
Right.
So similarly, I feel like we can like plant seeds around us and like nurture it, but then I feel like that framework almost like gives you like a permission to let go of like the consequence. You know what I mean? In the sense that the outcome. Let's say you have a seed, you're nurturing it, you have a seed, you're nurturing it, you're giving it the enough sunlight, you're giving it like the enough soil or whatever, and it doesn't grow. Then it's not like you are a bad farmer. Maybe it's just a bad seed.
Right. Yeah.
I,
Okay. Yeah. I'm with you a bit more
there's
now.
like an
Um.
element of anything you do that is like so interconnected with life's unpredictability. You know what I mean? There's never
Mhm.
like a one-to-one correlation between like action. If you do this, you get this out. If you do this, you
Right.
get this outcome. So always like life has its own way of like doing of being or something like that. And you can
Right.
just hope for the best, right?
Right. Well, I'm supposed to use that as like a concrete example. Let's say you work an office job. You could end up doing the right things and follow the right actions every time. If the company is in financial trouble, so they have to let you go because they have to make a whole load of redundancies.
Yeah.
You're right. If action and consequence were always related, if you did the right things every day, you would always have a job. But if something like outside that whole realm happens, then you're right. You might think, but I worked really hard. It's like, well, actually, it had nothing to do with you and the actions that you were taking. It's because something else was going on. It's exactly
Yeah.
the same things. Like let's say you meet somebody new and you go out on a couple of dates and you're like, oh, this is great, and then it ends up not working out. They don't want to see you anymore. You might think, but hang on, these things work really well. What you can never bear in mind is that person may have something completely unexpected going on in their personal life, and there's nothing you could have done to change the outcome, like action and consequence or action and result. You're right, are not related to each other because people and life and the universe and everything is always complicated, and there are always like multiple factors at play. So you're right. So you can create the art that you want, and you can do the things that you find satisfaction in. You can never guarantee that that means that you are then going to be a famous artist. It's like actors. So I know a guy who, so my friend's dad is very, very close friends. Like they grew up together with Sean Bean, you know, the
I
actor.
know.
Uh, so did you ever watch GoldenEye, the James Bond film?
I think I did.
Yeah. So he was the Bond villain in that film.
Oh, damn.
He's a lot
And that's the
more well
dad
known
of your friend?
over here. Say that again.
And that's your friend's dad?
No, so my friend's dad is friends with him. They grew up together, so they're really
Oh,
close
okay,
friends.
okay.
He told me a really interesting story. So Sean Bean's big breakthrough was in the movie Patriot Games, where he played an IRA terrorist with Harrison Ford. He walked into an audition. The story that I got told is that he walked into an audition. They took one look at him and said, "You look like the right part. Can you do an Irish accent?" So he did sort of some kind of Irish, some kind of Irish accent, like one or two sentences, and they were like, "Right, off to LA." That was it. So his big break, he barely auditioned during the interview. It was just because the casting director had an image in his mind of what he wanted, and he just happened to perfectly match that image. And so his kind of big break came as you could argue he's taken the
Yeah,
actions, like he's gone to the audition, right? But you will have other actors who will
act
go and sort
better.
of hammer and smash every single interview they do and never get anywhere. Because if you use this example I just gave as an analogy, this he just happened to fit the mental template for the casting director, and that was all they needed.
That's great.
You kind of
I
see the point
yeah,
that I'm
yeah.
making.
Yeah, it seems like there are almost like three actors in this like entire like dynamic, this like our world, our actions, our beliefs, our thoughts, that's one
Right.
world. And then you have like another person's world. This is coming from like Byron Katie, and another person's world, like you, your thoughts, whatever,
Mhm.
who you are and stuff like. And then there is just like everything else, like the environment, rain, weather, like the other things, right? And I feel when you're trying to get a particular outcome, that depends on these other two factors, the you and like the environment. You know what I mean?
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
say let's say I don't want to get rejected. That depends on you now, whether you reject me or not.
Mhm.
And it also depends on the environment, whether it's a positive environment, everyone's jolly, everyone's in the mood to interact, or sometimes people are not in the mood to interact. You
Right.
know what I
Right.
mean? Eh, But you're trying to like fight against these things, and you're trying to like calibrate your actions to get a certain thing over which you have no control over. Like I don't have any control over you or how you act or what you think or what your past is or whatever, right? And I
Right.
can't control the weather as well. I can't control whether it's raining or like sunny or like whatever, right? But the moment I try to like control it or try to like or try to like do certain things to in the expectation of like it responding a certain way, I feel
Mm.
that's when like suffering starts to kick in. You know what I mean? There's this weird paradoxical way of you want it not to rain or something like, or you want to not get rejected, so you do improve your skills. But once you did improve your skills and once you did let do the actions, you kind of have to like let go because you ultimately can't control the outcome anyway. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, actually, that's probably you've it just sort of led me to probably the best illustration of this whole thing. You can plan the ideal wedding and you can get every single element down absolutely perfect. What you can't predict is whether or not it's going to rain on the day, because obviously people have to book their weddings, like
Yeah, yeah.
months and months in advance. So you could get everything set up. So all the actions you take are perfectly aligned. But it could end up like your whole it's less of an issue here because all our weddings tend to be indoors. You get places like the US where people tend to get married outside, depending where in the country they are. You
Mm.
again, yeah, could design this lavish wedding, but it could end up getting rained out, and there's nothing you can do about
But it's so paradoxical though. I feel that's the paradox. Very hard to like. I don't know why it works this way, but this is how it works. Because you gotta act like it's not gonna rain. You gotta plan the wedding like it's not going to rain.
Yeah, sure. That is actually, yeah. That life is apparent. You've got to do the best you can and basically just try and go after what you want in the best way you can. Now, some people will do that like a bull in a china shop. Other people are a bit more strategic with it. But no, you have to try and do you have to try and design and create and live the life that you want. But there are so many things outside your control. In one sense, you can't get. It's not that you can't get attached to the outcome. You can't get emotionally um, tied up in whether or not it works out the way that you expect it to, because again, you never know. Um, if you look at kind of the tapestry in your life, like everybody faces disappointments where they're like, oh, this thing didn't work out. I tried to go for this thing and it didn't work. But then if you look, you can always do this exercise, even if it's a rationalization exercise. It's like, okay, this thing didn't work out, but in consequence, this thing happened, which led me to this thing, which led me to this amazing thing here. Like you can always trace the fact that you're constantly on this journey, and one thing didn't work out could be leading you to something better. Like that thing working out could have been an absolute disaster. Like you get the job that you applied for, and had to move cities, and because you had to move, you could have then moved cities and been absolutely miserable, whereas it didn't work out, and so therefore you then ended up moving into something else that over time is you can't see your whole timeline, right? So you never know.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm not saying that's necessarily a fruitful exercise, but sometimes it can be good just to kind of get you over the hurdle of disappointment.
Yeah, I feel at least I have been holding on to that so tightly, like how other people react or how the environment should react, is because it's very hard to like trust it. You kind of like lose your trust. This paradoxical way starts making sense when you kind of like trust life. It's a bizarre way to say. It's just that I act, I improve myself. I try to be the best guy I can, but I also like trust you as a person to like be nice to me. That's
Right.
ultimate, just like faith. I don't know. I don't think faith is like a good word, but probably like trust. I just trust that this guy is just gonna be a nice guy. And if he rejects me, probably something. So who knows what the actual reason is. But probably
Right.
like nothing that person. You know what I mean? And it's also very hard to like trust life as well. That when you act a certain way, that life could reward you. You know what I mean?
Right. So I think the way around that, at least one of the ways that I've been taught, is actually about having a growth mindset. So if something happens that you don't like, you immediately shift to, this is an opportunity for growth. What's the growth that I could claim from this one? Like, how could I interpret this as a good thing, or what can I use to learn or grow? And it's not to say, so that this is subtle, but I think it's important. That's not to say um, that when people say like, oh, this is all part of some kind of bigger plan that's leading me somewhere, because depending on your kind of your viewpoints, that can then actually lead you down a little bit of a problematic path. But what you can always do is not to say, oh, this happened for a reason, or this ultimately happened for my good. What you can always do is say, okay, well, what can I learn from this? Like, how can I try and what could I try and take from the situation? Because there are some situations that are so irredeemably shit that you it would be too much of a mental abstraction, or it would be too much of a rationalization to try and turn it for good, because sometimes just horrible things happen because we live in a world or a universe where there is a potential for good things to happen and a potential for bad things to happen. And it becomes very distasteful or almost impossible to say, oh, I can try and see this as a good thing. No, but what you can do is you can say, what could I take, if anything, from this situation? Like, how could I use this to grow or try and get some kind of benefit from it? Like, there is.
That's a great way to like define growth mindset. I've heard many, but I don't know why the way you phrased it or whatever, it just hit me like that. Makes a
I
lot of
can't. I'm
sense.
gonna have to go back and watch this because I can't remember
Yeah.
what I just said because my mouth is trying to catch up to my brain.
To my mind.
Um,
Yeah.
but let's use the example. There is not going to be anything good about, God forbid, a loved one dying, right? Like that is
God
just
damn.
that like
Yeah.
that is just an irredeemably shit thing to happen. So to say, oh, I'm going to try and turn this and make it a good thing, that to me is just
Inhumane
not
almost.
is not probably actually not going to lead you to anywhere helpful. If you were to say, how could I try and extract some kind of good from this? That could then be, I am going to be more intentional about spending time with my loved ones who remain, because
Yeah.
I realize that the time is short and life is precious and everything else. That at the very least you can take something of value from a bad
It doesn't
experience.
feel like
But
you
it's
got scammed by life, you know?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I suppose it then sort of puts that locus of control back on you a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but it's to say some sort of spiritual disciplines or ways of looking at the world will say, well, this is all part of all part of a bigger plan, and it taking you somewhere. I'm like, again, that for reasons like probably outside the scope of this, that can lead you on a um, can lead you to some pretty dangerous worldviews, but you can always try and extract something of value from every experience. So if nothing else, if something doesn't work out, you take the actions, but you don't get the results, whatever it is. There's always a way that you can try and get some kind of growth mindset from it. Because what's your alternative,
Yeah. Yes,
right?
sir.
Which is one of my favorite questions actually. Sometimes is, well, what's the alternative? You can kick and scream and moan and whine and complain and whatever else, but like what's the alternatives? Like the alternative is I can actually try and do something.
I love that frame of mind. Like, what's the alternative? And I feel like when your mind is pushed to a corner, it always does accept. You know what? Maybe I have to like push myself and stuff. I don't know. The image that came into my head is like war times. Like
Yeah,
like there's like even Romans said, if you want peace, prepare for war.
yeah,
Right? Like probably in their mind they had like the same question. I want peace. We have to go for war. What's the alternative?
right. Well,
Like
I know. I suppose actually, if you take that down to a human level, there are some things if you want to feel peaceful, right? Which that's not kind of an ultimate goal. That's a very
yeah.
short term goal. I once heard um, someone say, um, if you are not feeling peaceful, can you enjoy the meal that you're eating? It's like, no, it's like, so therefore, peace is not your ultimate goal. Peace is a basic requirement for you to be able to enjoy the food you're
Enjoy.
eating. Um, but to use the examples, like if you want peace, you have to prepare for war. If you want to feel peaceful and like not have all this kind of internal turmoil going on, there are sometimes you're like, well, there is something that's blocking that sense of peace, like some kind of internal issue I'm working on. I have to beat the shit out of that issue. Like I have to go to war on it because if I half-ass it, I'm never going to deal with it. Like sometimes some things you have to take on very, very slowly and gradually. Other things you have to go hell for leather, so to speak, and you've got to attack it until you've cracked it.
True. And I feel like you have to also if you half-ass it, it shows up again in your life until it's
Yeah.
like fully gone. It's like the reality is like testing you, in like different situations to just to make sure, would you react the same way or would you not?
Yeah, well, if you look at like the modalities that you and I have been trained in, if you're dealing with an issue, what do? You're dealing with like an issue, and you just want to at least temporarily get some relief from it. But let's say you're working on kind of a deeper issue. What's the way we've always been trained to do it? Look at this issue, focus on where you feel
Mm.
it, give it a number from 0 to 10. 0 is I feel nothing, 10 is this thing is unbearable. You work out where you are and you keep working on it and
Mhm.
processing it until you get it down to 0. You don't stop when it's a 2 or a 1, because if you do, it's just going to recur again. You work on it until you cannot find that issue in your nervous system, in your emotion. The nervous system is probably the best wording as any. You keep going until you cannot find that thing anywhere, which means you've actually processed it out. Because if you leave a little bit in there, it's just going to expand again, and you end up on this kind of merry-go-round. Now, sometimes we were talking about this yesterday. Sometimes issues recur, but you're like, I'm still wrestling with the same thing. You may not be. It could be that actually this thing is layers of an onion, and you've really successfully dealt with one layer. You've then just got the other, like the second layer that comes to the surface, and then the third, and so on. And so you keep working on these things. You peel the layers back one by one, and then eventually, at some point, this issue loses its hold on you, and until at some point, like we had a really kind of a deep chat yesterday, probably too personal to share on this one. But,
Yeah.
you know, we were having a chat about all these issues we were working on. It's like, wait, when is the last time I wrestled with this thing? And it was like the light bulb went off for both of us as I was, you know, encouraging you about changes and you were encouraging me. We were both realizing, hang on, we used to spend loads of time talking about our frustrations with these issues, and we dropped them, like we'd healed them to such an extent that we'd actually forgotten they were ever a thing. And so we then needed each other to kind of point them out. And it's like, I don't think you've realized the extent of the change.
Yeah, it's just that the feelings are familiar, but the issues that trigger those feelings are different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's never like the so my focus is always on like the feelings or the emotions or the sensations, but never on the actual issue. But when you actually notice that the issues, there are like certain type of issues that just stop happening to us.
Yeah.
And like a newer type of issues came up, like it's almost like a quest board, you know, like once you finish your quest, like new quests are added.
Right. Yeah, so the issues are going to be different. I mean, in terms of the emotions feeling similar, there's only a certain realm. It's like Doug Knoll, who taught me de-escalation techniques and affect labeling, who you had as a guest on your had as a guest on here, which was, like I said, it was an amazing interview. I loved it. Doug, you know, when he teaches affect labeling, like the way he taught both of us, there's really only kind of 7 layers of emotions that people tend to feel. Like the actual human range of emotions is very, very narrow. So you are going to feel the same emotions about different things, because if you're feeling unpleasant emotions, it is generally going to be, you know, frustration, anger, sadness, neglect, you know, there's few others, you know, feeling kind of abandoned, well, feeling like abandoned or whatever is kind of related to neglect. Like the actual kaleidoscope of human emotions is nowhere near as big as people actually think it is. So if you're feeling bad, you know, like I deal with, you know, I deal with in my job, I deal with a lot of angry people.
And
The
you're a
actual,
cop, right? So
the actual range of emotions really tends to be, if they're angry, it's because they're frustrated, because they feel like no one is listening to them. That on the whole, that one like cluster of emotions or feelings tends to cover most of the time. So when somebody's really, really angry, it's because they will feel disrespected or they will feel not listened to, and therefore they're frustrated, and the frustration makes them angry. Like the actual range of emotions is not very high. So you are always going to feel, generally speaking, like the same range of emotions about things. But yeah, the actual issue that you're dealing with is going to be very different.
That's what I like. So let's slowly like wrap this up, you know. And if you had to like say like what's like the if you had like look back, because I know the tools that work for us at one point of life stop working after like once you like grow a certain much, something else comes into your life. So in that way, techniques and tools are always, you know, it comes and goes, you know.
Yeah, different things for different seasons,
Yeah,
different tools for
exactly.
different blocks.
Exactly. Different tools for different locks, different tools for different layers of the onion.
Yeah.
But if you had to look back, apart from like what had been like the most, if you look back at your younger self, like what would you tell him?
If I look back at myself,
Like the guy who before he started the journey, and you're here now.
Probably, if you think it's complete bullshit, try it,
Try
because
it. Yeah.
that will be the thing. It seems to be the, like I said earlier, like the recurring theme is the things that have made by far the biggest and like most colossal difference to me. Like I said, I dismissed energy, and then working with Glenn and getting trained in energy awareness training, like fundamentally you change. Like my personality is completely different from how it was a few years ago. You know, a lot of the things that I'd always grown up with that I thought were immutable and unchangeable, they're not, because one of the biggest things that I've learned from um of all like the things I've been training, like NLP, neuro linguistic programming,
Yeah.
is that things are generally speaking a process, not a concrete thing. And NLP calls it the wheelbarrow test. So let's say somebody's like, I have anxiety, you know, I have like social anxiety. And what NLP does is the wheelbarrow test, which this sounds trite. Once your brain clocks into this, it's really big. It's like, can you put it in a wheelbarrow? Like is it an actual concrete thing that you can tangibly show someone else? And it's like, for
So what?
let's say something like social anxiety, just as an example. You'd be like, well, no, it's not, because it's not a thing, right? It's, again, NLP calls it a nominalization. You take a process and you turn it into something concrete, which means you lock it into place and you make it unchangeable. Something like anxiety, because it's not a concrete thing, it's a process. It is a pattern that you run in your brain, your nervous system, your emotions, your body. So you think thoughts a certain, or you see images a certain way, which triggers certain feelings, triggers certain emotions, triggers certain reactions in the body that then dictates the way you behave. That's a process. Like, it's a program that runs. And like any process, it can be interrupted and it can be redirected towards something else. So if I
Yeah.
was to kind of speak to my younger self about it, besides the whole, like, if it sounds ridiculous, try it. Um, I'd have
Can
to
you put
formulate
it?
the words, but it would basically be something along those lines. Are that so many of these things that you think are immutable, like are concrete, unchangeable, actually those are nominalizations. These things are actually processes, and because they're processes, you can actually do something to change them. So therefore, something that was like, I've got this thing, it's like, is it a thing, or is it a program that your nervous system is running? And then, you know, like all the tools that I've learned over the years to change it. So I wish I'd accelerated the journey, like started younger, um in terms of some things. But
But then it wouldn't have worked, see, because you wouldn't have enough experience to make to like kind of like reflect back, oh, this happened because of this and stuff like that.
right, exactly. And yeah, and I think a lot of this, so I said, you know, like my personality has kind of fundamentally changed. Some of that you might say, well, isn't that just part of like growing up and getting more mature? It's like, well, no, because some people get worse. And it's not for me to say, but like
Yeah.
hopefully I've improved along the way, because that's one of my like biggest, I suppose, like highest and deepest values, is just to keep being better today than I was yesterday. And again, that
Yesterday.
sounds like it sounds like something you put on a bumper sticker, so I don't really like it. But just in terms of the general idea of actually trying to keep things improving is a value. So yeah, I
So
completely lost my
I
train.
absolutely like love the wheelbarrow thing. Can you put it in a wheelbarrow? If you can,
Yeah,
yeah, you can't change it. If you
right.
cannot, you probably can't change it.
Yeah. So did you ever and this was a light bulb moment that hit me some time ago. Did you ever watch the Austin Powers movies? You know, Mike Myers are playing like the James Bond spoof.
No.
So you should watch those. They're really funny. They'd never be allowed to make them today because I think they're a bit too on the nose. But basically, in one of the films, and I think it was the second one, it's actually like, if you look at it from like an energy perspective, it's really interesting. So basically, um, the villain again, it's just a massive James Bond spoof, and there's like time traveling,
Yeah.
and like there's stupid slapstick comedy movies, but one of the things they do is they go back in time to when the main hero has been cryogenically frozen, and they go to steal his mojo, you know, because he's like again,
Yeah.
as a James Bond spoof, he's, you know, he's like a ladies man, but they did like a ridiculous version of it. one of the villains goes back and literally extracts his mojo from him, like he's taking
I don't know. Yeah,
like he's
yeah.
taking a blood sample. So he kind of pulls out this needle and he like extracts his mojo while he's cryogenically frozen. And it's this needle with this like little pink substance in it.
Yeah.
And
I
so
don't know
therefore
why I
he's
imagined it pink as well. In my
yeah.
mind, I imagined it to pink anyway. Cool. Fun.
Right. So he's then taken this mojo as he's like traveled back in time, and it then means that present day Austin Powers loses all his charm and his charisma with women, and he then becomes awkward or weird. That's actually a brilliant illustration of the point, because if someone's got like good vibe, or they've got their mojo or their game or whatever the hell you want to call it, it's not like a concrete thing that you can extract in a needle and show to somebody in like a test tube. It's a process that people undergo, and this is for everything, good, bad, whatever. If you can't like put it in a wheelbarrow or extract it into a test tube, then it's a process. And if it's a process, if you work out how the process runs, and this is basically fundamentally what NLP does as well as anything, it finds subjectively how is that process run, and it therefore interrupts it and redirects it to something more useful.
Damn. Thank you so much, Will. I love having you on. Hopefully, I'll have you on again sometime in the future.
Oh, I'd love to. It's like you and I talk about this stuff all the time anyway, so
Oh,
may as well get recorded doing it.
there you go. All right, guys. If you like this video, like, comment, subscribe. I mean, doesn't matter now, but I guess. Take care. See you. Bye bye.